Amanda Brooks stared out the window of the transport ship as Kepler Station came into view. The massive structure hung in space like a steel fortress, its angular design so different from the smooth curves of human architecture. Her stomach twisted with nervousness, but she kept her face calm. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, even if it terrified her. She was the first human ever assigned to work directly with the Valorians. The tall, powerful aliens had only recently agreed to let humanity join their alliance, and even then, they made it clear they had doubts. Humans were small, weak, and untested in their eyes. Amanda's job was to prove them wrong. The docking procedure took 20 minutes. When the airlock finally opened, Amanda stepped onto Valorian territory for the first time. The corridor stretched. Before her, everything built to a scale that made her feel like a child. The ceiling was at least 12 feet high, and the doorways were wide enough to drive a vehicle through. A young Valorian officer met her at the entrance. He was probably considered small by his species' standards, but he still towered over Amanda by more than 2 feet. His fur was a deep brown, and his eyes were the color of brass. "Lieutenant Brooks," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am Officer Venk. Follow me." He didn't wait to see if she would follow. He simply turned and walked away at a pace that forced Amanda to jog to keep up. She said nothing, just focused on not losing sight of him in the labyrinth of corridors. They passed other Valorians as they walked. Each one turned to look at Amanda with open curiosity or barely concealed disdain. She was used to being stared at, but this felt different. These weren't just looks of interest. These were the looks of predators evaluating prey. Venk led her to a large office at the heart of the station. Behind a massive desk sat Commander Thross, the station's leader. He was enormous even by Valorian standards, with a thick silver mane and scars that crisscrossed his arms and chest. When he looked at Amanda, his expression was completely neutral, which somehow felt worse than hostility. "So you are the human," Thross said. It wasn't a question. "You look even smaller than I expected." Amanda straightened her spine. "I'm here to serve, Commander. I'll do whatever is required of me." Thross leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "We shall see. You will be assigned to general duties across the station. Cargo handling, maintenance, equipment checks, whatever is needed. You will work the same hours as our junior warriors. You will eat what they eat, sleep where they sleep, and follow every regulation without exception." "Understood, sir." "I doubt that," Thross said bluntly. "Our junior warriors are young Valorians in their prime. They are strong, fast, and trained from birth for this life. You are none of those things. But you insisted on this assignment, and my superiors agreed to allow it. So we will see how long you last." He dismissed her with a wave of his massive hand. Venk escorted her to her quarters, a small room with a bed that was far too large and a desk that came up to her chest. There was no special equipment for humans, no accommodations made for her size. She would have to adapt or fail. The first day was harder than anything Amanda had experienced in her military training. The cargo bay assignments meant lifting containers that weighed nearly as much as she did. The Valorian workers moved them easily, tossing them to each other like toys. Amanda had to drag hers, her muscles screaming in protest. No one offered to help. No one even spoke to her except to give orders. She was invisible to them, beneath their notice, except as an obstacle to work around. By the time the shift ended, Amanda's hands were covered in blisters, and her back felt like it was on fire. She stumbled to the communal washroom, where she finally got her first look at the other junior workers. They were all young Valorians, their manes still growing in, their bodies not yet fully developed. But even the smallest of them was still bigger and stronger than Amanda. They stared at her as she entered. One of them, a female with golden fur, tilted her head curiously. A male with dark stripes nudged his companion and whispered something that made the others laugh. Amanda ignored them and focused on washing the grime from her hands. The meal hall was even more intimidating. It was a vast space filled with long tables where Valorians ate together in groups based on rank and unit. At the far end was a serving area where workers in stained aprons dished out food from enormous pots. Amanda quickly realized there was an order to everything. The senior officers went first, taking whatever they wanted, then the mid-level warriors, then the junior fighters. By the time Amanda reached the front of the line, the servers were scraping the bottoms of the pots. "What are you?" one of them asked, looking at her with confusion. "Human. I'm assigned here." The server shrugged and dumped a small portion onto her tray. It was maybe a quarter of what the Valorians had received, a thin strip of some kind of dried meat and a scoop of grain that looked like it had been sitting out too long. Amanda found an empty spot at the end of a table far from the others. She ate slowly, trying to make the small portion last. Her body was screaming for more food after the brutal day of physical labor, but this was all there was. Across the hall, the golden-furred female was watching her. Her name was Kira, though Amanda didn't know that yet. Kira saw how little food the human had. She saw how Amanda ate carefully, rationing each bite. She saw the exhaustion in the human's face, and the way her hands shook slightly as she lifted the utensil. Kira turned to her companion, Drex. "Did you see what they gave her?" Drex glanced over. "She's last in line. That's how it works." But she worked all day. I saw her in the cargo bay. She never stopped, even when she was obviously struggling. "She's human," another cub said dismissively. "They're weak. Everyone knows that." But Kira kept watching, and she wasn't so sure anymore. Amanda finished her meal and returned her tray. She found her quarters and collapsed onto the too large bed. Every muscle in her body hurt. Her stomach was still empty, and tomorrow she would have to do it all over again. But she didn't cry. She didn't complain. She simply closed her eyes and willed herself to sleep, determined to prove that humans belonged here. Outside her door, Kira stood for a moment, her curiosity getting the better of her. She had never seen a human up close before, never really thought about what it might be like to be so small in a world built for giants. As she walked back to her own quarters, a strange feeling settled in her chest. It felt like the beginning of something important. Amanda's second week on Kepler Station was worse than the first. Her body had started to adapt to the physical demands, but the constant hunger was wearing her down. Each day followed the same pattern. Wake up exhausted, work until her muscles burned, eat whatever scraps were left at the meal hall, and collapse into bed too tired to even think. The Valorians had a saying that Venk had explained to her during one of their rare conversations. Strength earns sustenance. It meant that those who contributed most to the tribe ate first and ate best. It was an ancient tradition from their home world, where food was scarce and only the strongest survived. On Kepler Station, this tradition translated into a rigid hierarchy at every meal. Commander Thros and his senior officers ate first, taking generous portions of the best cuts of meat and the freshest vegetables. The mid-level warriors went next, still getting quality food but not quite as much. The junior warriors and trainees went third, receiving decent portions of standard rations. And then there was Amanda. By the time she reached the serving line, the good food was gone. What remained were the bits that no one else wanted. Gristle and fat that even hungry young Valorians turned their noses up at, grain that had gone slightly stale, vegetables that were wilted and brown around the edges. The servers didn't do this to be cruel. They simply gave her what was left. In their minds, she hadn't proven herself yet. She hadn't earned better. Amanda tried to supplement her diet by eating the emergency rations she had brought from Earth, but those were running low. She had packed enough for occasional snacks, not for daily survival. Soon she would have nothing to fall back on. The hunger affected everything. Her hands shook when she tried to operate the maintenance equipment. Her vision sometimes blurred during long shifts. She found herself thinking about food constantly, dreaming about it at night. A simple meal that she had taken for granted back on Earth now seemed like the greatest luxury imaginable. But she never complained. Never asked for special treatment. Never showed weakness in front of the Valorians. She had been sent here to prove that humans could handle anything, and that was exactly what she would do. The cubs noticed everything. Kira had made it her personal mission to observe the human. She watched Amanda during work shifts, seeing how the small creature pushed herself beyond reasonable limits. She watched during mealtimes, counting the bites of food that Amanda ate and comparing them to what the Valorian trainees consumed. The difference was staggering. "She's getting thinner," Kira told Drex one evening as they sat in their common area. "Can't you see it?" Her uniform is loose now. It used to fit properly. Drex looked uncomfortable. Maybe humans are supposed to be thin. No one is supposed to look like that, Kira insisted. She's starving and everyone just ignores it. A third cub named Lena joined the conversation. She was smaller than the others, with sleek gray fur and intelligent green eyes. Why do you care so much about the human? Kira struggled to put her feelings into words. Because it isn't right. She works as hard as any of us. Harder, actually. Because everything here is built for us, not her, and we treat her like she's nothing. That's just how things are, Lena said, but her voice lacked conviction. The strong eat first. That's our way. But who decides who is strong? Kira challenged. Commander Thros? He sits at his desk all day while she lifts cargo in the bay. My father? He manages schedules while she crawls through maintenance tunnels too small for any of us. They eat the best food while she gets scraps. Does that seem right to you? The question hung in the air. None of the cubs had an answer. That night, Kira couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Amanda, alone in her quarters, stomach empty after another day of backbreaking work. The image bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The next day at the meal hall, Kira made a decision. She went through the serving line and loaded her tray with her usual generous portion. Then she found a seat near the end of the long table, close to where Amanda usually sat alone. Amanda came in later, as always. She looked even more tired than usual. There were dark circles under her eyes, and she moved slowly, as if every step required effort. She went through the serving line and received her pathetic portion, a few scraps of meat and a handful of grain. That was all. The human sat down at her usual spot several seats away from Kira. She began to eat slowly, carefully, trying to make the small amount last. Kira glanced around. The adult Valorians were all focused on their own meals and conversations. No one was paying attention to the end of the table, where the lowest-ranked individuals sat. Moving casually, Kira reached over and pushed one of her pieces of meat onto Amanda's plate. Then she stood up and walked away, her heart pounding. Amanda stared at the extra food. She looked around, trying to figure out where it came from, but Kira had already disappeared into the crowd. The human's eyes grew slightly wet. She picked up the meat and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. The next evening, Drex sat near Amanda. He had argued with Kira for hours about whether this was a good idea, but in the end, his conscience won. When no one was looking, he added some of his food to Amanda's plate and walked away. Amanda noticed the pattern by the third day. Different young Valorians kept sitting near her and food kept appearing on her plate. She never saw who was doing it, but she understood. They were helping her in secret, risking whatever consequences might come from defying the station's hierarchy. She wanted to thank them, but she knew that acknowledging the help might put them in danger. So she said nothing. She simply accepted the gifts with quiet gratitude and continued to work as hard as she could. By the end of the week, all 6 of the junior cubs had joined the conspiracy. They developed a system, taking turns each day so it wouldn't look suspicious. They learned to move smoothly, to time their actions when the adults were distracted, to make it look completely natural. Lena turned out to be the best at it. Her small size and quick movements made her nearly invisible. She could slide an entire piece of meat onto Amanda's plate without anyone noticing. The cubs never talked about what they were doing, even among themselves. It was as if acknowledging it out loud might break the spell, but they all felt it, a sense of purpose. A feeling that they were doing something important. Amanda's condition began to improve. The extra food made an enormous difference. Her hands stopped shaking. Her vision cleared. She had more energy during her shifts. She even started to gain back some of the weight she had lost. And something else changed too. The cubs began to see Amanda differently, not as a weak outsider, but as someone worth protecting, someone who deserved their respect. She worked harder than most adult Valorians they knew, and she never gave up no matter how difficult things became. The human was teaching them something their elders had forgotten. That strength wasn't just about size and power. Sometimes it was about endurance, about refusing to quit even when everything seemed impossible. In their own way, the cubs were learning what it meant to be truly strong. The cubs' secret operation continued for 3 more weeks. They became bolder as time went on, more confident in their ability to help Amanda without getting caught. What had started as a simple act of compassion had evolved into something more significant. It had become their rebellion against a system they were beginning to question. Kira remained the leader of their group, though no one had officially given her that role. She was the one who had started everything, and the others naturally looked to her for guidance. She began to pay attention to what foods Amanda seemed to prefer, which items gave her the most energy for her demanding work. She likes the root vegetables, Kira told the others during one of their private meetings in an unused storage room. I've noticed she always eats those first, and the protein bars seem to help her more than the fresh meat. Drex nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Humans have different digestive systems than we do. My instructor mentioned it during biology lessons. They process plant matter more efficiently. Then we should focus on giving her more of those items, Lena suggested. We can spare them easier anyway. Most of us prefer the meat. The conspiracy gave the cubs a sense of purpose they had never felt before. Their days on the station had been routine and somewhat boring, filled with basic training exercises and menial tasks. But now they had a mission. They were making a real difference in someone's life. Amanda, for her part, was changing too. The improved nutrition allowed her to work even harder. She started volunteering for the most difficult assignments, the ones that other junior workers tried to avoid, cleaning the waste reclamation systems, doing maintenance in the cramped access tunnels. Working double shifts when the station was short-staffed, her reputation began to spread. The adult Valorians noticed that the small human never said no to any task. She didn't complain about the dirty jobs or the dangerous ones. She simply did whatever was asked of her, and she did it well. Venk, the officer who had first greeted Amanda, found himself impressed despite his initial skepticism. He mentioned it to his supervisor during a routine briefing. The human is exceeding expectations, Venk reported. Her work quality is excellent and her attitude is exemplary. I haven't heard a single complaint from her in over a month. His supervisor, a grizzled warrior named Court, grunted. Probably knows she would be sent home if she complained. Humans are supposed to be soft. Emotional creatures who can't handle real hardship? Perhaps, Venk said carefully, but her performance suggests otherwise. Meanwhile, the cubs were learning lessons their official training had never taught them. They learned about empathy, about looking beyond surface differences to see the person underneath. They learned about courage, watching Amanda face each day despite the overwhelming challenges. And they learned about justice, questioning whether their traditional ways were always right. One evening, as Kira was preparing to add food to Amanda's plate, something unexpected happened. Another junior trainee, a male named Vex who was not part of their group, sat down next to her. I know what you're doing, Vex said quietly. Kira's heart nearly stopped. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. I've been watching. You and the others have been feeding the human. Vex's expression was unreadable. I want to help. Kira stared at him. Why? Because I work in the cargo bay with her, Vex said. I see how hard she works. Yesterday, she spent 6 hours loading containers without a break. 6 hours. Do you know what she did when she was finished? She asked if there was anything else that needed doing. An adult warrior wouldn't have done that. They would have gone straight to the rest area. So you're with us? Lena asked, having overheard the conversation. I'm with her, Vex corrected. That human has more warrior spirit than half the adults on this station. If you're helping her, then I'm helping too. The group grew from 6 to 7, then to 8 when Vex's sister joined. The conspiracy was expanding, but so were the risks. More people meant more chances of getting caught. Amanda noticed the increased portions. Sometimes now, there were multiple pieces of food appearing on her plate during a single meal. She felt overwhelmed by the kindness and also worried. What would happen to these young Valorians if someone discovered what they were doing? She tried to catch their eyes to somehow communicate her gratitude and her concern, but they were careful never to make direct contact. The system only worked if it remained invisible. One day, Amanda was assigned to work with Kira on a maintenance project. It was the first time they had been alone together. They worked in silence for a while, checking the atmospheric regulators on one of the lower decks. Finally, Amanda spoke. Thank you. Kira pretended not to understand. For what? You know what? Amanda's voice was soft. All of you. I know what you're doing and I know it's dangerous. If someone finds out, you could get in serious trouble. We're not doing anything, Kira said, but there was no conviction in her words. Amanda smiled sadly. You're terrible liars. I just want you to know that I appreciate it more than I can say. You've kept me going when I was ready to give up." Kira stopped working and looked at the human directly for the first time.
"Why don't you give up?"
"It would be easier. You could request a transfer, go back to your own people. No one would blame you." "Because this matters," Amanda said. "Humans have dreamed of joining the galactic community for generations. We've looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there, who else was out there, and now we have our chance, but only if I can prove that we're worth accepting. If I fail, if I go home, that door might close forever. That's a lot of weight for one person to carry." "Yes," Amanda agreed, "but someone has to carry it. And I'd rather it be me than force someone else to take this burden." Kira felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about helping someone who was hungry. This was about something much bigger. Amanda was fighting not just for herself, but for her entire species. For every human who would come after her. "You won't fail," Kira said firmly. "We won't let you." That night, Kira called a meeting of all the cubs involved in the conspiracy. They gathered in their usual storage room, cramped together in the small space. "We need to be more careful," Kira told them. "The longer this goes on, the more likely we'll be discovered. But we also need to do more. The human needs our help not just at mealtimes, but in other ways too." "What did you have in mind?" Drex asked. "We can adjust equipment to her size. We can volunteer to work with her on difficult assignments so she has backup. We can shield her from the worst attitudes of the adults." Kira looked at each of them in turn. "We started this to help one person, but it's become something more important. We're helping to change how our people see humans, how we see ourselves." The cubs nodded in agreement. They understood now that this was about more than sneaking food onto a plate. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it went against tradition. It was about recognizing strength in forms they had been taught to dismiss. Their quiet rebellion continued, but now with renewed purpose and greater care. And Amanda, sustained by their kindness, kept working harder than anyone thought possible. Commander Thros was not a fool. He had led this station for 12 years and had survived battles that would have killed lesser warriors. His success came not just from strength, but from observation. He noticed things that others missed. And lately he had been noticing something very strange about the human. It started with small details. Amanda's work performance had been good from the beginning, better than expected for such a small creature. But over the past month it had become exceptional. She moved faster, worked longer, and handled tasks that should have been beyond her physical capabilities. Thros mentioned it to Court during one of their private meetings. "The human is performing too well. It doesn't make sense." Court shrugged his massive shoulders. "Perhaps we underestimated her species." "Perhaps," Thros said slowly. "Or perhaps something else is going on." He began to pay closer attention. He watched Amanda during her shifts, noting her energy levels and stamina. He reviewed her meal allotments, checking the records to see exactly what she was receiving. The numbers didn't add up. With the portions she was officially getting, she should have been deteriorating, not improving. Thros was a warrior, but he was also a scientist. He understood nutrition and metabolism. The human was receiving maybe a third of the calories she needed for the level of work she was doing. By all logic, she should have collapsed weeks ago. Yet she seemed to be getting stronger. There were only two possible explanations. Either humans had some kind of incredible efficiency that allowed them to function on minimal food, or Amanda was getting nutrition from somewhere else. Thros knew which answer was more likely. He ordered a review of the station's surveillance recordings focusing on the meal hall. It took his security officer 2 days to compile the footage and analyze it. What they found was both surprising and troubling. The recordings showed a clear pattern. Over the past 5 weeks, various junior trainees had been systematically transferring food to Amanda's plate. Sometimes it was 1 or 2 cubs, sometimes it was 3 or 4. They worked in shifts, coordinated like a military operation. And they had been doing it so smoothly that no one had noticed. Thros watched the recordings 3 times, his expression growing darker with each viewing. This was a serious breach of station protocol. The meal hierarchy existed for a reason. Dating back thousands of years in Valorian culture, these cubs were defying tradition, undermining the social order. But as he watched, something else struck him. The care with which they operated. The obvious planning and coordination. The way they looked at Amanda not with pity but with respect. These weren't children playing a game. They were soldiers executing a mission they believed in. Bring them to me, Thros ordered his security officer. All of them. And do it quietly. I don't want the rest of the station knowing about this yet. Within an hour, 8 young Valorians stood in Thros's office, lined up like prisoners awaiting judgment. Kira stood at the front, her chin raised defiantly even though her legs trembled. Behind her were Drex, Lena, Vex, and 4 others. They all knew they were in serious trouble. Thros stood from his desk and walked around it slowly. He was massive even compared to adult Valorians, and next to the cubs he looked like a giant. He stopped in front of Kira. Do you know why you're here? His voice was quiet, which was somehow more frightening than if he had yelled. Yes, Commander, Kira said, her voice steady despite her fear. Tell me. We've been helping the human, sharing our food with her. Why? Kira hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because it was the right thing to do. The right thing, Thros repeated. You defied station protocol, undermined our social hierarchy, and conspired behind the backs of your superiors. And you think this was right? Yes, sir. Kira's voice was stronger now. I do. Thros turned to face all of them. Explain yourselves. All of you. I want to understand what possessed you to do this. Drex stepped forward. Commander, the human works harder than any of us. She takes the worst assignments without complaint. She never gives up, no matter how difficult things get. But she was starving. We couldn't just stand by and watch. She's an outsider, Thros said. Not part of our tribe. Not our responsibility. She's a person, Lena said quietly. Isn't that enough? Thros felt something twist in his chest at those words. He turned away from them, walking to the window that overlooked the station's main work areas. Below he could see Amanda in the cargo bay, directing a team of loader drones. Even from this distance he could see the efficiency of her movements, the competence in how she handled the machinery. You understand there must be consequences, Thros said, still looking out the window. What you did violated station regulations. If I let this go unpunished, it undermines my authority and the entire structure we've built here. We understand, Commander, Kira said. We're ready to accept whatever punishment you decide. But we're not sorry for what we did. We'd do it again. The other cubs murmured their agreement. They stood together, united in their defiance. Thros turned back to face them. Why her? Of all the causes you could have chosen, all the battles you could have fought, why did you risk everything for one human? Kira thought about the question seriously before answering. Because she reminded us of what it means to have honor, not the honor we're taught in our lessons, about strength and dominance. Real honor. The kind that makes you keep going when everything is against you. The kind that refuses to give up even when it would be easier. And because she made us see that our ways might not always be right, Vex added. We've been taught our whole lives that the strong deserve more, that hierarchy is natural and good. But watching the human made us question that. She was strong in ways we didn't recognize, and our system punished her for it. Thros was silent for a long moment. He thought about his own youth, about the idealism he had once felt before years of command had hardened him. He thought about the rules and traditions he enforced and whether they served any purpose beyond maintaining the status quo. You're all confined to quarters for the next 3 days, Thros finally said. No work shifts, no training, no interaction with others. Use that time to think about whether your actions were worth the consequences. The cubs nodded, accepting their punishment. However, Thros continued, and his voice was different now, softer somehow. I want you to know that I understand why you did this, and perhaps there is honor in what you did, even if it was against regulations. He dismissed them and they filed out quietly. When they were gone, Thros returned to his desk and pulled up Amanda's file on his computer. He read through her performance reports, her work assignments, every detail of her time on the station. Cord entered without knocking, as he always did. What will you do about the human? I'm going to talk to her, Thros said. And then I'm going to make a decision that will probably make my superiors very angry. What kind of decision? Thros looked at his old friend. The kind that's right, even if it's not traditional. He stood and left his office, heading toward the cargo bay. It was time to have a conversation with Amanda Brooks and to admit something that he had been too proud to acknowledge before. The cubs weren't the only ones who had been learning lessons. Commander Thros had been learning too, and it was time to act on those lessons. Amanda was in the middle of recalibrating a sensor array when Venk appeared beside her. His expression was serious, more formal than she had ever seen it. Lieutenant Brooks, Commander Thros wants to see you in his office immediately. Amanda's heart sank. This was it. She was going to be sent home. Somehow Thros had discovered what the Cubs were doing, and now everything was over. All her hard work, all her hopes of proving humanity's worth, all of it ended because some kind young Valorians had taken pity on her. She followed Venk through the corridors, her mind racing. Should she try to defend the Cubs? Should she take all the blame herself? She couldn't let them be punished for helping her. Whatever happened, she needed to make sure Thros understood that they had acted out of kindness, not defiance. The walk to Thros's office felt like it took forever. When they finally arrived, Venk opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Amanda stepped inside, her spine straight, despite her fear. Thros sat behind his massive desk, his expression unreadable. He studied Amanda for a long moment before speaking. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair that was far too large for her. Amanda climbed into the chair, her feet not quite reaching the floor. She felt like a child called to the principal's office, but she kept her face calm. "I discovered what the Cubs have been doing," Thros said without preamble. "They've been feeding you." "Yes, sir." Amanda's voice was steady. "But I want you to know that I never asked them to. I didn't encourage it or even acknowledge it. They did it on their own, and if anyone should be punished, it should be me for accepting their help." Thros held up a hand. "I'm not interested in assigning blame. I want to understand something. You knew that our meal hierarchy exists for a reason. You knew that accepting extra food violated our traditions. Why didn't you refuse?" Amanda took a breath. "Because I was starving, sir. I was working 12-hour shifts doing physical labor, and I was getting maybe a quarter of the calories I needed. I tried to make it work with just the official rations, but my body was breaking down. If the Cubs hadn't helped me, I would have collapsed within another week or two. Yet you never complained. Never asked for accommodations or special treatment. I was sent here to prove that humans can integrate into Valorian society," Amanda said. "Asking for special treatment would have defeated that purpose. If I couldn't handle the same conditions as everyone else, then I didn't belong here." Thros leaned back in his chair. "But you couldn't handle the same conditions, that's the point. You needed help to survive." "Yes, sir," Amanda admitted, her voice quiet. "Do you know why I'm telling you this?" Thros asked. "To explain why I'm being sent home?" "No," Thros said. And there was something different in his voice now. "To explain why I was wrong." Amanda stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. Thros stood and walked to the window. "I've been thinking about strength a lot lately, what it means, how we measure it. We Valorians pride ourselves on physical power, the ability to fight, to endure, to dominate, and by those measures you are weak. Any of our Cubs could defeat you in combat. Most could lift twice what you can lift." He turned to face her. "But the Cubs saw something in you that I missed. They saw a different kind of strength. The strength to continue when everything is against you. The strength to work twice as hard as anyone else just to keep up. The strength to face each day knowing you're outmatched and overwhelmed, and to never give up anyway." Amanda didn't know what to say. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. "My people have traditions that go back thousands of years," Thros continued. "The strong eat first, the weak eat last. It's always been this way. But watching you these past weeks, I've realized something. Our traditions don't account for courage. They don't account for determination. They only measure physical capability, and that's not enough." He moved back to his desk and pulled up something on his computer. "I've reviewed your performance records. You've exceeded every standard we set for junior workers. Your work quality is exceptional. You've volunteered for the most difficult assignments, and you've done all of this while being systematically denied adequate nutrition." Thros looked directly at Amanda. "That ends today. From now on, you will eat with the mid-level officers. You will receive full rations appropriate for your workload and metabolism. And anyone who questions this decision will answer to me personally." Amanda felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "Commander, I don't know what to say." "Don't thank me," Thros said gruffly. "Thank the Cubs. They saw what needed to change before I did. They had the courage to act while I was still clinging to old ways. What will happen to them? Amanda asked, worry coloring her voice. They've been confined to quarters for 3 days as punishment for violating station protocol, Thro said. But between you and me, I think they're heroes. Sometimes the rules need to be broken to show us they were wrong in the first place. He pulled up another file. I'm also recommending you for a commendation. I'll be sending a report to my superiors and to your human military command. You've performed exceptionally under conditions that would have broken most warriors. Your species should be proud. Amanda couldn't stop the tears now. They ran down her face as she tried to find words. I just wanted to prove that humans belong here. You've done more than that, Thro said quietly. You've taught us something important. That strength comes in many forms, and that our old ways of measuring worth were incomplete. That's a valuable lesson, and one my people needed to learn. He stood, signaling that the meeting was over. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow you start fresh, with a full stomach, and the respect you've earned. Amanda climbed down from the chair. At the door, she turned back. Commander, those cubs saved my life. I hope you know that. I do, Thro said. And I hope you know that you've changed theirs. They'll never look at strength the same way again. Neither will I. That evening in the meal hall, something unprecedented happened. When Amanda entered, Commander Thros himself stood from his seat at the high table and called out to her. Lieutenant Brooks, you'll sit with the officers tonight. The entire hall fell silent. Every eye turned to watch as Amanda made her way to the officers' table. A place was made for her. And when the servers came around, they gave her the same generous portions they gave everyone else at that table. At the far end of the hall, 8 young Valorians watched from their regular seats. They had been released from confinement early, with Thros explaining that 3 days was too harsh a punishment for doing the right thing. Now they watched as the human they had helped took her rightful place among the respected members of the station. Kira felt pride swell in her chest. They had done this, not through strength or dominance, but through compassion and courage. They had changed their entire station's perspective on what it meant to be worthy. Amanda caught Kira's eye across the hall. She raised her glass slightly in a subtle toast. Kira returned the gesture, a small smile on her face. In the weeks that followed, things changed on Kepler Station. The rigid hierarchy began to soften slightly. Work assignments were distributed more fairly. The meal portions for junior workers increased. It wasn't a revolution, but it was progress. And Amanda continued to prove herself day after day, showing that humans could not only survive in the galactic community, but thrive in it. She worked harder than ever, but now she had the energy and resources to do it properly. Her reputation spread beyond the station, to other Valorian installations, and even to other species. The human who had been denied a meal became the human who changed an empire's perspective. And it all started because a few young Valorians had the courage to see beyond tradition, to recognize that true strength wasn't just about power, but about character. Years later, when Kira and the other cubs had grown into respected warriors themselves, they would tell the story of Amanda Brooks. Not as a tale of charity or pity, but as a lesson about recognizing worth in unexpected places, about having the courage to question tradition when it was unjust, about understanding that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could shift the foundations of entire civilizations. And whenever young Valorians asked them what it meant to be truly strong, they would always give the same answer. Strength wasn't just about what you could lift or how hard you could fight. It was about refusing to give up when everything was against you. It was about standing up for what was right even when it went against everything you'd been taught. It was about seeing the value in others, even when they looked nothing like you. That was the lesson a small human had taught them, and it was a lesson they would never forget.